Hello there, people of the internet. So, I decided today that today would be a fantastic opportunity to have Kevin scream in the background. He's my peacock. I got 4 of them. They're all named Kevin. Welcome to the channel if you don't know who Kevin is. So, I was having a conversation with a buddy of mine. And me and this buddy were talking about just how far the development of firearms technology has gone, you know, in the past 300-400 years, just how much we have improved and how dramatic the improvements are. Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate that. My God. But I figured since it was a fun topic to discuss with this buddy, it'd probably be a fun, topic to discuss in a video as well, so that's why I'm out here making this video. We're going to be discussing the development of handguns and how they developed over the years. So, we're going to start from the very beginning. Firearms weren't really necessarily a handheld thing. They had instances, they were basically like tubes on wood or tubes that you just held in your hands, and a lot of times they wouldn't fire solid projectiles, they'd fire like grape shot or something like that. That was like the only kind of handheld projectile way back in the day. And then cannons became very mainstream. They discovered that they could, if they had the firearm mounted on some sort of stable platform, they could make them considerably more powerful and they could fire much larger projectiles from them. They were just a much more effective weapon at the time whenever they were mounted on some sort of mechanical platform. So they made cannons, and that was very mainstream for a while. And then technology got to the point where somebody was like, hey, why don't we take those cannons and we make something legitimately practical that you can hold in your hands? And eventually this developed into muzzle loaders. And there's all sorts of different firing mechanisms for muzzle loaders. You got the flint locks and the wheel locks, and I mean there were muzzle loaders that were so simple that whenever you pulled the trigger, it just lowered a lever down that had like some burning twine on it. There were a tremendous amount of ways that people made muzzle loaders, but the premise was, very simple. It was some sort of barreled system on some sort of stock, or it had some sort of, holding mechanism and some sort of firing mechanism, and you would pour powder down your barrel, and then you'd put a ball down it, or patch, or, whatever it is that you were trying to do, whether or not you were loading like grape shot or a ball round, or whether or not you had rifling, or there's many different ways to load a muzzle loader and send a round down range. But powder and ball, and then some sort of firing system to set that off. Single shot, and then you loaded it again, powder and ball. It's a very slow process. During the time of these muzzle loaders, they were using rifles and muskets and things like that. And eventually somebody came up with the idea, why don't we have a much smaller... What is that? You guys heard that, right? What is that? Goddamn Florida! Jesus Christ! Alright, well, it's over there. I'm gonna let it stay over there. Eventually somebody saw, these rifled muzzle-loading firearms, and were like, hey, why don't we compact that into something that you can just hold in your hand and fire from your hand? And eventually they came up with muzzle-loading pistols as well. They were both basically developed around the same time, but for the most part, I use the term rifle. For the most part, rifle style firearms came first, but they didn't have stocks on them. They were like mini cannons that you would basically hold. So eventually, firearms technology would go from loading black powder down the barrel of whatever it is that you were trying to fire. And this is why we're talking about handguns, because I'm including these right here. We'll get into more in-depth subjects on what I mean about that. Just bear with me here. Eventually it got to the point to where people were like, we want more than one shot inside of our firearm. So eventually they came up with a system like the revolver. There were a lot of systems out there to get more than one shot, but this right here was one of the more popular ones. This is a very simple system. This right here is all you do. Instead of pouring powder and ball and whatnot down your barrel, you pour it directly into your chamber, your revolving cylinder right here, and that right there is what you would use to hold multiple rounds. The premise is still the same. You still pour your powder in, you still put a ball on top, except now you have multiple chambers and one single barrel, as opposed to the barrel and, one chamber in the very, very back. Now this one right here is, an old rusted out Pieta and it's not an original. This one right here definitely needs some work. It's seized, it's not functional, it's very pitted. I got a screw and bolt holding the actual ramrod on. But the premise of these is very simple. After you pour your powdering and you put your ball down in your patch or whatever it is that you're wanting to do, this area actually has a built-in ramrod that you can use to force your ball into place. Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate that. But now people had 6 shots or 5 shots or 3 shots, depending on the size of the cylinder. And that is what they were using as opposed to the single shots that they were using before technology like this came around, where they were able to have some sort of system that had multiple shots. Now, eventually, there came the time where somebody was like, you know what? I don't like how slow these muzzle loaders load. So eventually, cartridge technology came around, and we started using the types of cartridges that we are familiar with today, whether or not they're rimfire or centerfire, just some sort of encased system where the bullet, powder, and primer are all, or you know, percussion cap or whatever it is that they're using, are all in one general system that you load directly into the cylinder or breech or muzzle, or you load somewhere. It's a much quicker system than it is trying to load individual powder and ball and, you know, then cap it or prime it or whatever it is that you're using with your firing mechanism. This right here is a good example of exactly that. This is before smokeless powder came around. This is a black powder revolver. This is a 1883 pattern Reichs revolver. I actually made a video about this. You know, go check that out on the channel if you get the opportunity to. But this takes actual cartridges that you would load inside of your revolver right here, as opposed to having to individually load every single chamber with powder and ball and then ram it into place and then individually cap every single chamber. This right here, you have the actual cartridges, you load it right in. It's still black powder. It doesn't have the strength that modern propellants do, and it is incredibly corrosive. Anyone who has ever used black powder knows that no matter what you do, black powder will be corrosive. Thank you, Kevin. Wonderful input. Fantastic. Are you done? All right, so we eventually got around to developing cartridges, and still with the with smokeless powder not yet existing, self-loading and automatic firearms just were not viable. They could not be made because of the fouling of black powder. That's why we were still using revolver style systems even whenever we had cartridges. I had my buddy ask me, you know, if these took cartridges, why not load it in some sort of self-loading system? And I was like, black powder fouling. You literally, like, they will gum up and they will not function. So that is why that is why they were still using revolvers back during this time period. You have a manually operated system where you have to manually make the firearm function, and it's not like, you know, a semi-automatic where you just pull the trigger and it goes bang, 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 bang. Alright, now I need my hearing protection because we're starting to get into firearms, and I'm actually going to start firing because I have ammunition for them. So smokeless powder is invented, and now all of a sudden automatic firearms can be effectively created. And ironic as it is, they chose to go with bolt action systems. But automatic firearms are created, and your modern style handguns start to really take hold on the design. The design of modern style firearms really start to exist. And we see that with this right here. Now this right here is a 1911 A1. You guys have seen this before on the channel. This is like one of my favorite things to show off because it's one of my favorite things to shoot. 45 ACP. This is not the design that was actually created, but the general mechanical premise behind this right here is what you would start to see at the turn of the century. After smokeless powder, I mean, you had like some really oddball looking designs like the broom handle Mauser, and then eventually the Luger, which is like a toggle lock system. But as time progressed and firearms technology really began to show how simple and easy the mechanical systems on these self-loading firearms could be, eventually things got to be a much simpler locking design that did not require near the machine work that a lot of these much more intricate self-loading handguns did. And this right here is a very good example of that. Now this is, like I said, just similar to what was invented. This right here is a 1911 A1 variant, which wasn't made until after World War I. I'm just basically using this as an example to show where self-loading firearm technology had gone. But the general idea for the self-loading technology was you no longer needed to use a revolver. I mean, people still use revolvers even to this day. They just enjoy the old wheel guns, and so do I. That's why I have revolvers, and I use revolvers just because I enjoy it. But self-loading technology was now available and very much becoming the way of the future. And people were beginning to see the perks, with lack of a better term, the perks of using a self-loading firearm as opposed to a revolver. Back during those days, reloading your sidearm was not really a fast procedure. They did have like ejection ports, and eventually they came around with a cylinder that like opened up. But even so, reloading a revolver is never a fast process. Thank you, Kevin! Jesus Christ, dude. Reloading a revolver is never a fast process, unless you're like Jerry Michalek, and eventually they came up with the idea of speed loaders and whatnot. But a revolver with a speed loader and 6 shots is still going to be slower than a semi-automatic, you know, with an 18-shot magazine. So the idea was that you would actually have your rounds encased in some sort of magazine system, or on like a stripper clip that you could just load into an internal magazine like the broom handle Mauser did. And you would just load said rounds into said semi-automatic, and you wouldn't have to individually load them into a chamber. They would already be in a magazine or on a stripper clip or something like that. And then you would be able to run the firearm far more effectively and far quicker than you would with one of those old style revolvers, especially if you're talking a single action. These right here, this is a single action firearm, but it is a single action firearm that is automatic. It automatically cocks its own hammer every time that you pull the trigger and you're wanting to fire it. Now you do have to chamber around, but besides that, there's no other mechanical operation that you have to do with this firearm here. The only thing that you would have to do is put a round from the magazine into the chamber, unlike with the old style revolvers that were single action, where you had to manually cock the hammer every single time, or you had double action revolvers, but double action revolvers have very heavy triggers and they pull the hammer back themselves, and it's just, it was a compromise whether you would go one way or the other. With automatics, you don't have to compromise that. You get the nice, crisp, comfortable single action trigger pull, especially in these 1911s. And you don't have to worry about having to cock that hammer every single time or cycle the slide every single time. It just does it automatically. So I've got some 45 ACP in this thing, and I've got a box down there, and I'm just going to shoot that box a couple of times. Alright, that box is coming right at me. Now, specifically the 1911 A1 by T-Sauce does give pretty bad hammer bite, so I gotta like hold it a very special way, like different than I would hold other 1911s. This one's got to be, it's got its own unique grip, so I don't get hammer bite here. Ba-bang! Thank you, Kevin! I appreciate it, buddy, but it's not gonna stop me. You know what, let's go for that piece of wood too. Yeah, there we go. These are fun little guns. I'm not a fan of the T-Sauce 1911 because of the hammer bite, and I gotta like hold it really uniquely. But this is the only 1911 that I have, so this is the 1911 that I'm bringing out here to show off. I should get another one. I should get another 1911. So, the premise for the design of the modern firearm, the modern self-loading firearm, has been created, and this right here is what the United States military would use for a very, very long time until the adoption of the Beretta M92, and that's, you know, military technology is a whole other ball game in itself. It was becoming very clear as to what people were going to start to move towards, and we saw use of what people would eventually move towards very predominantly, even whenever these right here were very predominant design. Even whenever these massive steel frame handguns were being created, people were trying to find ways to make smaller, more compact, lighter weight self-loading handguns, much like they did with revolvers. They were trying to make smaller revolvers as well, back whenever those were popular, just so people could conceal them, use them as pocket guns. They were lighter weight. People that weren't, you know, in military service, that weren't looking to have a gun that they were, well, they weren't having to use it very often. They were having to carry it way more often than they were actually having to use it. So we eventually developed firearms technology that would accommodate more towards that. All right, and in comes the modern style of handgun. We went from steel heavy guns to learning how to effectively use polymers and plastics and whatnot to make a much lighter weight gun. This is a far lighter weight firearm than the 1911 is. This is chambered in 9mm. We have discovered that having a smaller round that is much more potent than its original design is a better option because you get more ammunition. We have discovered that double stack magazine as opposed to single stack allows you to carry more ammunition. Just with modern production and modern design and modern everything. Wonderful, Kevin. You're once again screaming. Thank you. Anything else? Nah, you're good. All right. Just with modern technology, we were able to make these firearms double stack without sacrificing a lot of size. Of course, there's going to be some size difference whenever you're talking about a single stacking a double stack magazine in any kind of firearm, but the size difference is far less noticeable than it used to be back whenever handgun technology was still being developed. But we have lighter weight firearms, easily or way easier to carry firearms. We've kind of gotten rid of the hammer. We've gone more towards internal hammers or striker fire systems. Depending on what it is that you're wanting to get, for the most part, most of your modern guns are going to have some sort of enclosed system. We still have single action, double action, depending on what it is that you're wanting to get. I mean, there's just a tremendous amount of options out there. This does not have an optics cut on it, but nowadays you have systems to where you can put some sort of optic on your handgun. Optics technology has gotten good enough to the point to where a lot of your optics can handle the G-force of the sliding back and forth and slamming that optic around. We have just figured out the best way to make the lightest weight, most comfortable handgun possible, because people will be carrying them way more often than they will be using them. Wonderful, Kevin. I appreciate that. Now, these are far easier to disassemble than where automatic handguns originally came from, like with the Luger or the C96 or something like that. Way easier to disassemble one of these modern handguns than the old style of handgun. Most of your modern handguns are going to have some sort of tilting barrel locking mechanism inside of them, with some exception. There's like rotating barrels out there, and there's gas-operated handguns, and there's all sorts of different things out there. But for the most part, a vast majority of them are going to have Browning's tilting barrel design. It's just a very effective design that can be very easily and cheaply made. So we went from basically hand cannons to polymer frame, magazine-fed, self-loading handguns, oftentimes double stack, sometimes triple stack. I have seen a couple of those, but those are very far and few between. Holding a lot more ammunition than the original handgun systems. I'm trying to pick my words here very carefully, because I know a lot of people have like extreme sentimental attachment to those old style handguns. So I have this Taurus G2C. That's what this is right here. This is very much a modern designed little handgun. I got a couple of rounds of 9mm in this thing. I'm going to go ahead, send some lead down range, and let's see what happens here. This is a much more comfortable handgun to use than that 1911 is. Oh, we had a failure to fire. There we go, double action and she fired. So I'm assuming that was an ammunition problem and not the actual handgun problem. Okay, there we go. So this is where, oh, that's interesting. This is where handguns are nowadays. I imagine that in the next 100 years we're going to see another dramatic shift in what the technology is going to become. Or hell, we could see that in the next 20, 30, 40 years. I mean, who knows what's going to happen in the future. Or there could be nothing. We could have another nuclear apocalypse. another. But this was a fun video to make, so hopefully you guys enjoyed watching. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel, like the video. Description down below has a link to all sorts of stuff. Go ahead and go check that out. That being said, I think I'm going to go grab some more ammunition and have some more fun with this thing. I actually really like this little Taurus. Now, the ammunition that I'm running is like cheap steel case ammo, and it's kind of old. So occasionally I'll get failures to fire, but that's not an end of the world situation. So I'm gonna go burn off some more of this ammo because I'm having a good time. You guys go off, have yourself a fantastic day. Thanks for watching. And I'm probably going to make me another video, so let me know what you guys' thoughts are down below on what I may have missed whenever it comes to the development of handguns. I know that I've missed many things. I mean, I am just giving a general ballpark. I mean, I could be here for hours talking about absolutely everything that went into the development, but I'm giving like a generalized description of everything that came along. So just as a generalized like rule of thumb of everything that existed at these different time periods, the biggest turn of firearms technology in general was the invention of smokeless powder and everything that managed to bring to the table. I think that is like the biggest game changer, because you were able to make self-loading firearms after that, and after that we just kept developing self-loading firearms to be better and better and better and better, and they've gotten so good nowadays for not a lot of money. For, you know, anyone can afford to go out and get themselves a half-decent little handgun like this. Anyway, like I said, you guys go off, have yourself a fantastic day. I'm gonna go grab some more ammunition, put some more rounds downrange. Thanks for watching. Been a little while since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. The poor man's Garen. It's a shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.